Hello, I want to welcome everyone to the Power of Our Story. We are a tribe of protectors who really help one another. Anybody who is out there that would like to join our coffee and conversation, it's a great place to process in a no judgment zone with other protectors who get it. And today I cannot be more excited about having Zeke Vanderpool and Mary Millsaps from Operation Angel Wing on today to talk about the healing powers and the science behind storytelling and the healing of trauma. So we will be handing it over to them to share, and then we will open it up for question and answer. And then at the end, I am thrilled to be able to play a song. Zeke Vanderpool is a musician. I absolutely love his song that I'll be playing. So stay tuned for the end too, and we'll end out that way. So Zeke and Mary, welcome.
Sarah, thank you so much. And thank you for the song thing. That means a lot to me. I really appreciate that. When I look around in the room and just like the company that's here is just awesome to me. And I am a veteran. I am almost a retired law enforcement officer. I've got about a year left. Mary is a career, had a 20-year career in the medical field as well. And so we're right here with the people that we love and that we love to work with and learn from all along the way. And it's so cool to see Clay and Todd in here after we were all in the workshop together, and Sarah in there with us. There's just so much to be looked at that's so new and so innovative, and then just the power of the community within when we share and we realize we're not the Lone Ranger. That the struggle is actually common among us. The pain may be, or the experience may be a little different, but the pain is very common and very real. And so let me just start by giving you just a quick synopsis of how we came to be in Operation Angel Wing. A couple of you have already heard this, so hopefully it won't be beating you up with the same stuff, but I'll make it pretty quick because we have a lot to cover. So I guess the road that brought us to you guys, for me, starts back, it would have been 2012. I had just come out of a year in Iraq with my military unit. I was in Army Special Operations and found myself at Walter Reed Army Hospital standing beside the bed in the emergency care unit of one of my dearest friends who had lost his leg in Afghanistan. We had been in Iraq for a year together. James had gone back to Afghanistan because they badly needed medics, and he is a phenomenal 18 Delta Special Forces medic. He's incredible. Didn't take him long. 2 months in, he hopped a ditch on a patrol, found a pressure plate, lost his left leg, and had massive damage just throughout his whole body. But I go back to that specific night for me because it was kind of a pivotal moment. I had talked everybody into going to get some rest for the night that had been around him. And it was just me and James. And like in that chaotic darkness of an emergency care room in the middle of a cold spring night up in Bethesda, Maryland, you know, you got the lights beeping and the sound of the wound vac, and it's just eerie. It's kind of surreal. But every now and then, James would wake up from that drug-induced sleep that he was in, and his eyes would scan the room, and they would come to rest on mine. And I would nod, and he would return that nod, and then he would slip back into the darkness. And those moments were critical for our connection. I knew how important they were for him. They were just as important for me. But it was in between those moments when I stood by and waited on the next one that, like, my mind literally began racing back over the fields of Afghanistan and of Iraq, the battlefields, and to my brothers who would never feel their homeland under their feet again, the ones that we had lost, and then to their families, the ones that how many I had stood beside as they received a flag and condolences, and then like leaned into as best I could at the time the aftermath with them. and all of that stuff that happens behind closed doors on the other side of the battlefield when the guns are silent. And I knew in that moment that it was getting very close to time for me to retire. I had 23 years in, and I was busted up physically, emotionally. My family was not doing well. There was a lot of things that needed attention, and it was just time, and I knew it. But I also knew that I wasn't ready to quit the fight. I knew that. So I began to realize that I was going to have to reconnect to some purpose here in this transition, and that it was more than likely going to be just what I said, just trying to help my brothers and sisters through what happens on the other side of the battlefield, to include James, because I knew we had a long road in front of us, and there's no way I wasn't going to be beside him every step of the way. So I did. I retired right after that. And as I think that the universe, our maker, tends to put things in front of us when we accept challenges and start reaching for purpose. I came across Mary less than a year later, and I was back into my federal agent job in law enforcement, and I was conducting Homeland Security briefings along the I-40 corridor in North Carolina. And Mary found out about what I was doing and invited me to come in and provide those briefings for a group of first responders. Now, here you have a lady that had a 20-year career in emergency medicine, all the way, she likes to say, from the ditch to the desk, all the way up through occupational health as an administrator there. So she knew the entire gamut of the system. But here she was, mentoring people on the front lines, and I automatically connect to that. That hits me, lands on my chest. She was big into search and rescue, and early in her career, and so she had these people in the room mentoring them, and we figured out that we had the same mission statement in mind. Actually, Angel Wing didn't exist yet, but that mission being to help our and our first responders and their families and the communities they serve through the devastating effects of post-traumatic stress. And then what I came to find out as we started putting two and two together, Mary is also an amazing healer of trauma. And if you track back to where that came from, her history with abuse is worse than most stories I've even heard at this point after 9 years of doing trauma work on the front lines. From a young girl all the way up into her early 20s, she endured a phenomenal path of abuse and torture, and somehow emerged from that with this incredible ability to heal. She didn't pull back and hate the world. She chose to love the world instead, and to bring this healing power forward. So when we came together and formed this organization, we knew the mission statement. We knew that we would never deviate from that, but we also knew that we were stepping into a pretty tough arena. And one of the first challenges we knew we were up against is that reluctance for people to come forward, for people to ask for help, especially those of us in the servant heart world, right? Our soldiers, our first responders, we are the first ones to help someone when they need it, and we are the last ones to ask for it when we need it. And when we knew that. And so it's interesting to me, Sarah, that you bring up, and I appreciate that you bring up the music. So one of the first things that we did, I have been playing the guitar and writing music pretty much my whole life. It's always been my outlet, but I'm not the guy to perform, to get up in front of crowds. That's never been my thing. My songs were for me and my brothers. We'd get together on the lake bank in between deployments with a jar of classified substance and a mason jar. And we would just heal and do that thing. But Mary said, no, we're taking your music into this arena and we're going to connect. And I was like, no, I don't think we are. And she's like, yes, we are. And I'm like, well, damn it. So I got to figure out how to do this. And I spent some time just trying to get good enough to where I wasn't just making an idiot out of myself doing this. And we did. We went into VFWs and American Legions, which, hey, Those are smoky old bars. They just are, but they're a treasure trove of veterans. And what we found is that I would go in and we'd do a set, right? And inevitably, even if it was just one or two people, would come up to us after that, and they would say it was some of the best compliments I've ever received. They'd be like, "Son, I've lived that song. I got an old Vietnam vet or a World War II vet occasionally come. I've lived that song." So here's what happens in that moment. There is a relevance that is established in that moment that comes from what we call below the waterline. It is, you don't even realize what's happening. But in that moment, because we carry some of the same scars, we've been scuffed up in some of the same ways, there is a relevance and a trust that occurs that bridges that gap of reluctance many times. It's the most powerful thing there is to bridge that gap. A good example is Clay's song that he wrote and brought in. It lands right in the primal existence. It's the oldest form of communication because music is story. Story is the oldest form of communication and the most effective form of communication. And when you bridge that gap and you have trust, then you get reciprocity. And you know, in those moments, it just proved itself again and again that when they leaned in like that, okay, we got them. We can work with them now. They're going to trust us to do what we do. And we were able to bridge the gap on so many levels in that process, and when nobody else could, and everybody, and that's probably one of the biggest challenges for nonprofits and other organizations that reach out is kind of the inability to bridge that gap, or at least the challenge of bridging that gap. And I get it; it's a very real challenge, but when you can, and story is, in my opinion, the most effective way to do it. There's some magic that happens, and it opens up the door to healing when nothing else will. So, you know, I obviously I could go on and on about this, and I don't want to overdo that, but that is the path that brought us to where we are here. Now we have leaned in alongside Scott Mann with the play Last Out. We do the intervention and the emotional support for that, and there's been some wild rides in the midst of that. It's been challenging but extremely rewarding. And then there are plenty of other places, and just as an example, as an organization, you know, one of our biggest like goals and objectives is to really insert into this national epidemic of anxiety and suicide. It's just incredible where we truly are outside of what you see in the media. You guys know what I'm talking about. So we'll go into places like this past weekend. We went to Cherokee, North Carolina, and we inserted with the Cherokee Indians, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, their police department up there, right? And the police, their fire and their EMS. And we taught them suicide prevention, psychological first aid. It's a course that we call suicide prevention, safety, and recovery. I think I got that right. I get the names wrong sometimes, but anyway, we're going in and teaching the science of trauma. We're giving them the tool, because I mean, we got several people that either were or came from firefighters in here. Perfect example. There's so many suicides within our first responders, and firefighters oftentimes, it's really common that it takes everybody around them by surprise, which it does anyway everywhere else, but really that shows up with firefighters. And it's like everybody around was like, we were just laughing, we're just joking this morning. I don't understand. I can't believe this. Nobody had any clue. So we go in and we teach them the science behind the trauma and how that manifests in suicidal ideation, and why, for instance, that when someone gets to that point, they're going to protect the ones around them from the knowledge of what's going to happen. So how do we observe, interact, and kind of breach that in a way that we can establish trust and pull them out of that and go from there. So these are so many of the things that we're involved in at the core and the heart of what we do as an organization. And you know, we've been extremely successful with this. And there are multiple reasons for that. And I credit the majority of that to Mary's brilliance in the curriculum that we come forward with, because she is also a master practitioner of neurolinguistics programming. She's board certified on so many levels, from timeline therapy, right on through RTM. There's so many things that we bring to the table with tools, but just what we're finding is all of that is critical. And there are a lot of failure points out there around that we have been able to put together and mitigate, but none of it matters if you can't connect. None of it matters if you can't build trust and have that connection that allows people to step in and let you step in alongside them and kind of shepherd them through it, and then even coach beyond it. So there is quite a structure to it, but what we have found is a very effective approach, and we're thankful for that 100%. Mary, do you want to add anything to that? I know it'd be easy for me to squirrel here.
Well, I think you're doing a fine job. So, but
I'll take
hello, everyone. As Zeke's mentioned, I'm Mary Millsaps, a neuro-linguistic practitioner, master level, and a ton of other things that which we're not here to go over my credentials. But I want to talk about storytelling, and where it really resonated for me, and when I knew it was going to be part of what we part of the core teaching as far as angel wing, and it has opened doors and really made us a very relatable fit for a lot of other organizations to come in alongside, like Scott's storytelling workshop. So we created a curriculum called therapeutic storytelling, and it was born from my first responder days. I noticed that first responders are great storytellers. I mean, we have a ton of them, right? Every day we get new stories to tell. Unfortunately, they're not really, they need to be censored and not ready for the public because we're going to put our spin on it, and we're going to put our opinion and our perspective on it. And through service, I was noticing when I was really wanting to head toward the mental health piece, that I was starting to really evaluate and notice that, like, why do we tell the stories that we tell, but we're not really telling the stories about us. We're not telling the hard stories. And why is that? And it's because it's so difficult for us, right? We know that the human condition and experience, story makes us very relevant, and we connect through it. But at the same time, when it comes to our stories of struggle, we are so resistant to telling those stories. We just don't. And we'll build we'll tell everything but then I also know that there's a level of vulnerability, and I was noticing that you have to reach in order to tell that story, and that place has to be safe. And we just don't have that. It's not out there for us, right? Not for our serving hearts and warriors. So that's what we did when we created the model, the path of destruction. It was an umbrella that would allow us to bring in the science, the story, and the science around the stories. And as Zeke has mentioned, I mean, it is how we connect. It doesn't matter if it's in the form of poetry or if it's in the form of music. It's how we relate to each other is through story. But they can be it can be the most difficult thing to do. So it is to tell that. So what I wanted to do was to be able to create a program that would be actually healing, that we could use our stories and heal from them. And it's not unlike any other storytelling programs that are out there. We just happen to favor Scott because he does it right. And that's why we work with Scott Mann. So I'm going to open it up to you guys for questions, because like Zeke said, I could sit here and squirrel all day and just talk about a ton of things that maybe is not even what you want to hear. So I'm going to let you guys ask questions, and that'll be the best way for us to, beautiful questions will be the best way for us to get this thing going.
Mary, I have a question for Jim. So Jim, I heard your intro there, and there's so much unsaid behind just a few, top end things that you touched on. But I have a question for you. There's a legend in the fire service world, who happens to be a retired forester that lives up in Eastern Kentucky now, where I'm originally from, up in the hills of Appalachia. And he also happens to be Scott Mann's father. His name is Rex Mann. And I'm curious, have you ever come across or have you ever heard about Rex Mann in the fire service world?
I have not.
Gotcha. Okay. I didn't know. It's interesting. Rex is a legend, and of course he's a forester and was instrumental in leading and developing the approach towards the forest fires out there. He worked out that way for many years, where he really made a name for himself. But Rex also, and this is the power of story as well, and it illustrates it. Rex, as he moved into retirement, was instrumental in developing a blight-resistant strand of the American chestnut tree. And if you don't know, the American chestnut tree was wiped out by a blight, and an entire culture in Appalachia went away with it. It literally was a staple of a culture in Appalachia. So when he worked and developed this blight-resistant strand of trees, they decided who better to help implement that or begin to implement than the Cherokee Indians, the Eastern Band up here in North Carolina. And it's pretty rare that a paleface like us gets to go before the board, the tribal council of the Cherokee Indians. But we did, and Rex went in there with the power of story. And he happened to be dear friends with one of the elders on that council. But so we went in together, and Rex stood up in front of them and told the story of his life, his struggle, and connected that to the chestnut tree and the relationships that developed from that. Opened up our connections within the EBCI, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, and allowed us to go in where no outside agency has come before and introduce our agency, our curriculum, our skills to a group of people who desperately need it. Some phenomenal first responders and veterans. Native American community is absolutely full of veterans, and which is incredible what they are, and they're very under-resourced. And so to go in and take that was really cool. But that goes back to the power of story. And I just wondered if you'd ever come across the legend of Rex Mann at any point.
No, I haven't, but I appreciate you sharing the story, and I'll do a little digging now.
Pretty cool stuff. And I appreciate you and each and every person in here because of the service. Now, this is not just a generic thank you for your service. This comes from one of your own, someone who has my entire adult life. I'm 50, getting ready to be 54. My entire adult life, I've had either 2 or 3 jobs the whole time at the same time, but military or law enforcement. And my heart is truly with our servant hearts in this country. It's absolutely why we do what we do. But also there's the awareness of challenges for us that have been met with a woeful or at least a very inadequate set of resources up to this point, as proven by the fact that things have just gotten worse. The numbers have gone up, and so many things out there just aren't working. And so not by any means knocking the conventional measures that are put in place. I'm not going to sit here and do that. I'll be careful, but just acknowledging that it's going to take more. It's going to take an integrative approach with some of the things that we're learning now that science is completely backing right now with the studies that are happening and coming out. So yeah, just a big thanks to everybody. And whatever questions you guys have, please, let's hear it. What are you guys interested in tonight?
Before we open it up, I'd love to make a comment. This is something that I forgot I didn't say at the beginning. First off, Zeke and Mary, you have such a place in my heart. I see your passion. I see your heart. And the reason why I know that is, in fact, Jim and I were there together. We had a group of people at Scott Mann's last out Elegy of a Green Beret. And I am so glad that I made it to the storytelling workshop with Zeke and Mary, which is the hero's journey part of Scott Mann's nonprofit organization. And it was just so good. It was such a great place of safety. It was great prompts to kind of help us together, learn how to share our stories. And another cool thing too, just to connect the dots, Holly Higgins, who works with Zeke and Mary and Scott Mann, helps us on Thursday night, our Thursday night call, to kind of learn how to do the storytelling. Another thing too, I'm going to be putting your links, Zeke, your music and Operation Angel Wing, on the podcast, also on the chat here. I was so moved, also not surprised because of who you guys are, but moved at the multicultural groups of healing trauma. Like I believe there is a woman from Afghanistan who was in there talking about her trauma. I think sounded like she was wondering why she was there, with veterans, and yet you have these people come together to see that, this is a human experience, and they were healing together through their stories and through, your training and expertise in helping to guide that. And I just love that. So I thank you so much, Zeke and Mary. I appreciate that. And if you don't have anything, if you don't want to respond to that, I can open it up. I think Chris has his hand up.
Yeah, no, thank you, Sarah. And what you saw there was a video that we did when we were working with the Afghan resettlement in the wake of the fall of Afghanistan. And it just as a quick note on that, it does, you said that perfectly. It highlights the fact that, trauma is a human experience. And at the end of the day, sure, there's cultural considerations that take place when you lean in with people, but the truth is, this is a human experience. This is a human journey. And it affects all of us in very much the same way. And that's what, I think it's liberating for us to learn the science behind it, because it shows us that, we're not broken. Things are doing at a certain level what they're supposed to be doing. We just get stuck in certain areas, or we lose some things along the way. Like Mary likes to say, that we have the ability to gain back if we approach this correctly and to move beyond it. So it's the reason that we don't use the D. We drop the D in our organization because we don't feel like it's a disorder. We treat it more like an injury. And as many injuries, you may have effects from injuries for the rest of your life, but you heal from them and you learn to move on and not let that hold you back from forward motion in your life, which is critical. And that's such a big part of what we're about, is approaching it that way, moving through it and moving beyond it. And I'm telling you right now, I'm going to say this, anybody
we follow that. Zeke, I wanted to just add, not to interrupt you, but what we do with trauma is we follow the science. So we don't guess at it. We don't look at it, as a theory based. We follow the science, and that's why we're very successful at resolving traumas.
Totally agree. And I really will say, anybody who is willing to do the work can get through it. But there's no shortcuts, but there is absolutely a way through it that doesn't involve so much of some of the conventional mindset about things around trauma. And so, like I say, I'm not gonna hack on the conventional world, but I am most definitely very convicted about the way that we do this and the success rates that I've seen. I mean, even taking Vietnam veterans who have woken up for 30 years plus, swinging on their wives in the middle of the night, and just working through it with them, and having their wives come to us and say, thank you for giving my husband back, and watching those things fall away. It's very doable. And we're very dedicated to changing or affecting the culture around it as we go forward, because we do believe that integrated approach is the answer to slowing this thing down and to putting a stop to it. So
it truly is. I mean, when he keeps referring to the industry, and it's not about it's either or. It's going to, at 168 million mental health diagnoses in the United States, it's going to take a collaboration. It's going to take a partnership. So bringing in really non-chemical, non-invasive therapies and modalities to counter that is going to be key, because it's not the only, I think what Zeke's referencing is that it's designed to treat the mass. And unfortunately, our traumas are very individual. So it's missing a chunk of people that will not go out and jump into that mass and say, hey, it'll work for me. So what we do when you're looking at natural psychologies, you're looking at characteristics, you're looking at the science, you're looking at the behavior and the individual environment that person is navigating daily. And that's what we do. That's how we practice. So that's the baseline of our practice. So Zeke, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just wanted to clear that up because we kept saying the industry of not going there, we're not going there, but we went there. Okay. So that's where we're at with it.
Yeah, but
Very
in the way that,
complimentary.
so definitely in the way that we understand that we all agree that I think the integrative approach is what's needed here. And so,
Yes.
but let's open it up, man. Who wants to jump in here?
Zeke, real quick too, can you just tell us, what does it look like? A first responder, they want help. They want to come to you guys. What does it look like? How do they do it?
Mary, do you want to touch on that or do you want me to run with it?
Oh, I mean, as far as like reaching out to us?
Yeah, like if they can work with you, what does it look like? Do they go to you physically? Is it online? Is it groups?
Oh, it's both. Yes, ma'am, it's both. We do a lot of, we have about 9 different programs, and our top program is the suicide prevention, safety, and recovery. Things tear down from there. We have transitional leadership programs, but what that looks like is they can reach out to us through our email, through our website. And then from there, we work with them as an individual. So it's the same process. There is a consultation, there is an intake. And throughout, we have the treatment protocol that we have is a 6-week protocol, and it will take us from intervention to root cause and through to post-traumatic growth. And during that time, we are doing multiple assessments to see and make sure that once the interventional piece has been served, that there's nothing extra that needs to be addressed. Because if there is, we have our own counselors that we will refer to.
Okay. That's
Yeah.
great. I definitely want to talk to you more later about all this. I'm very interested. Thank you so much. Chris, do you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, thank you both for being on. I really appreciate it. And coming from a couple warriors and first responder, I think that we exist because our culture sucks. And we're doing a really good job right now, I think, of putting this together for mostly, it seems, post-service people who are now willing to be vulnerable and authentic and things like that. From your perspective, how do we integrate this into in-service, or even better yet, for military basic training, police academies, fire academies, so we can head this off maybe at the beginning level, so that's more of a grab at the culture change. Because, as our great friend who's not here today, David Perez, says, one of the biggest things you can do to help somebody is let somebody know they're not alone. And it's also me too, if you will, that I'm struggling. And I think that we all are. And I don't think we can get through any of these jobs without being cracked up in some sort of way and shattered. But we think that that's individualistic to us and that we're some sort of weak thing. So when this power of our story stuff, when they hear it, like, oh my God, it's not just me. I'm not crazy. I'm not weak. I can get better. There is support. From your perspective, if you've thought about that, how can we introduce that into in-service, maybe pre-service?
And thank you so much, Chris, for bringing that up. I will tell you that most of my post-traumatic stress came into service with me, and it was complicated by my service. And I used to, I was so afraid to tell my story because I just felt like it was it needed to be censored. I just wasn't going to share it. And then there was the part of the normal, right? I wanted to be just normal. I'd come past it and I just wanted to fit in. So when we were looking at the protocol and looking at workshops, they were all designed to come in resolve that pre-service trauma and prepare them for the traumas of war, for the traumas of service, and for what's coming, right? So that is the basis and core of what we do. So thank you, Chris, for bringing that up. If you're wanting, you can email us or get with us. We do have programs, and we are working with National Guard and some other installations about getting these workshops and getting these trainings in, just like what we did up at Cherokee. And then that program, what it looks like is it will come in with a full day of workshops, and then there are 4 mandatory in-services throughout the year that will continue to build on it.
Okay, and I think David said it, and several other people have said it. I think that it's some astonishing number, like 70% of first responders and military folks have been abused or have some sort of huge trauma coming into service, and it's one of the reasons that they do it. So yeah, thank you both so much. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to connecting with you both more on that.
Yes, and I'll tell you, this is why the point that he brought up about why we gravitate to that is, if you think about someone that comes through a lot of struggle before they, they're going to gravitate to a structure, they're going to gravitate to safety, they're going to gravitate to guidance, and that's something that they did not have in their former life prior to service. So that's why you'll see a plethora of pre-service trauma in military and first responder communities. So Chris is spot on with that.
Yeah, and Chris, I really just love your whole approach on that, because it raises such an honest truth within our community. And the fact is, we're wired for connection. We just are, as human beings. We're wired to connect at community level, even if we're individual, even if we're introverts, we're still wired to be connected on a certain level. And what happens when we lean in and we have commonality now, and we realize that we're not the Lone Ranger, there's a sense of community that develops around that ongoing struggle. And it's extremely powerful. I love that you brought that up, and it's something that we focus on a lot. And I think Mary covered the programmatic stuff very well. I just wanted to thank you for bringing that up. It's a big deal.
Yeah. So Clay, did you have your hand up? I'm sorry if we.
Oh yeah. First, I just wanted to say, Chaplain Todd and I went to the workshop. Was it last month in Phoenix? And I owe you an email, Zeke, and Todd. I'm gonna call you later, and we'll talk about our trip to South Dakota. So
looking forward to it, brother.
Yeah. So I just want to say, in 2015, I went on a Wounded Warrior Project trip to San Antonio, where we got lifetime memberships and mentors from the Writers Guild of America, their Writers Guild initiative. And, it was good, but it was more on crafting a story, right? And I told Scott, like the Monday or Tuesday after the show, that he and a bunch of other people have been helping me write my book. And I told him that before your workshop, I just had a bunch of stories. And now I know how I'm going to tell it. And, I just wanted to thank you guys for that, because I've been working on this for 2 years, and people breathing down my neck and stuff. And I didn't know what to say other than, here's what happened when I was 9. Here's what I did when I was 14. So now I have a way of being, I think, being more authentic with it, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. And I'm thankful for that. You and you guys both brought up, and I wanted to actually touch on how important this is. The vast majority of people that we work with that are really close and like really off the rails, almost every one of them that have significant pre-service trauma. And it's not something I really paid a lot of attention to until we started doing this work. Even just the level of trauma around us, the level of abuse, the level of shit that happens. Sorry, Sarah, I'm trying to keep it clean. The level of stuff that happens out there, even as a cop, responding to that stuff. I didn't realize like how huge that net is for all of us and how far it goes back. And when, you know, obviously working with Mary and learning, going from being the trigger puller, knuckle dragger to being the guy that wants to lean in with this and having to learn myself. I'm just astounded. And the level of pre-service trauma is, you cannot discount that. And you guess what? When we hit the wall, when we get to that point where we're in transition or whatever's going on, we medicaled out, we got hurt, whatever. When we hit that wall, it all catches up to us. It's just a huge deal. And somebody's either hot micing or
Yeah, I'm
Hot
sorry.
mic, hot mic, Todd. Hot mic.
Who's that? Oh, it's Mike. I'm sorry, Mary. I muted you because I thought it was you.
No,
Sorry.
it's not me.
No, it's the radio in my truck. I turned it down.
They're,
Oh,
I'm
okay.
good.
fine. But
But,
since your
that's just-
hands up, Todd, Zeke, if you're finished, you won't let Todd go ahead. Maybe that's
Sure.
why he won't mic. Yeah.
So, you know, the biggest thing that I got out of the workshop was how impactful storytelling is, not only for the person that you're telling it to, but what an incredible impact it can have on yourself, even as you're telling or developing the story. When we came back from our first time out pairing up, and then we started talking about recalling all of the sensory input from the story that you're telling. And my story was of one of the most traumatic experiences in my career, which was a DUI accident where a young family, including a 6-year-old girl, was killed by a drunk driver. And it was who knows how many DUI accidents I'd been out at that point. But in recalling all of that sensory input and then telling the story, I blew up a suppressed memory that, even working through EMDR and the other therapies that I've been through, was still buried. And we know that those buried memories come up and they manifest themselves in negative emotions that you have no idea what the source is. And I actually assaulted this DUI driver, and had to be pulled off him by my station captain. But having discovered that, I was able to work through that negative memory or that negative emotion and process it. And that wouldn't have come out without my going through that exercise. And that was a huge impact. And then the big illustration of the impact of storytelling on the people who are hearing it was Clay. And it was Friday night, and we're at the show. And I'm not a veteran. And the story was incredibly emotional for me, regardless. But the most emotional part for me was sitting next to Clay and watching him watch this show, man. And at one point, at 2 points, he turns to me and he looks at me and he says, "I lived this play, man. I lived this." And later on in the show,
Scott's talking about my friends. That's the characters in this play. 2 of the guys that they mention in the play are guys I watched die in front of my face.
wow.
and that was the other moment, Clay, was when they went up and they grabbed that little bottle of Jack off of the wall of honor, and he looked at me and he said, "You have no idea how many of those guys I knew." And man, I'll tell you, that was that was an emotional sledgehammer. And I can't imagine, the impact that had on Clay. I mean, I could see it. It manifested itself physically, but I can't imagine, the memories that Clay was processing while he was watching.
Todd, I remember that moment in the workshop when when we went in and did the imaging exercise and you emerged from that, like eyes wide open, and you were like, holy cow. Now, it speaks to something that I think is really important as a topic tonight as well. There are a lot of workshops out there, and there's a lot of story workshops that do a whole lot of good in developing story and things like that. But what we have come to know, and it's how we approach this 100%, is that you need to be trauma educated when you step into those moments, because our trauma is our story. Our story is our struggle, period. But if you step into that without the tools to navigate that, it can throw you off the rails real quick. And so that's why I'm very thankful you were both in our workshop. We were talking to somebody, it was maybe a week ago or so, and this lady was talking about how her son had been involved with the workshop. It was a high level thing. I think it was supported by Sting, by Gordon Sumner and stuff several years ago. There were several big dogs that got into it. And they did this. They brought people together and did story work, but there was no trauma-informed piece, right? So it all culminated in a big workshop I think it was up in DC. She was talking about her son was there. Her son was helping lead this. And it went totally off the rails. People became traumatized. They became, it triggered them, and there was no getting them back, So it's trauma is an interesting animal, but the what? The thing about it is when we educate ourselves and understand the science behind it, this opens up an entirely new capability of stepping into the struggle for us. You mentioned Wounded Warriors. We were at a Wounded Warrior. We got invited to Nashville a few years ago, and we spoke to program directors in Wounded Warrior, and we taught them this. And even in Wounded Warrior, 3 of the people in the room were amputees. They had worked their way up through the Wounded Warrior system and become program managers over various outreach programs. Those 3 guys and the others looked at us and said, for the first time, I understand what happened to me. I understand why I went off the rails. I understand why I did it. And I thought to myself, I was grateful for that, but then I kind of got a little bit pissed off. I was like, why is this not out there? If an organization with the bandwidth of Wounded Warrior hasn't brought this to these people, why is it not out there? And then I realized it's just not been out there. We're just now really breaching this door and bringing this knowledge into play and these skills and these tool sets into play. And so by following the science, by understanding trauma as we lean into our stories, man, the healing power is unlimited. It is literally the thing that gets us to the other side of this stuff. I appreciate you bringing that up. I'm walking on somebody. Is that Mary?
Yeah, no, you're not walking on me. I was just going to add to that. It's one of the reasons, like Operation Angel Wing, we have about 12 different programs, therapeutic storytelling being one of them. But we are a standalone organization, but a lot of our power comes because we are also a supporting organization. So we can, if you have mission and a vision, and you want to send this healing message out, we can come alongside you and actually bring in that mental wellness piece and bring in that therapeutic piece. And it's one reason why, because what Zeke is talking about, having trauma-informed trainings there that will prepare you, is why the story workshops have such a great success. And I have to take my hat off to Scott, because he is extremely he owns the responsibility, right? And he makes sure that there is someone there that can provide that psychological and emotional safety. It's not, he doesn't risk it. Because when we're just telling stories, that's okay. But when we're telling stories about our struggles, and the actual story structure is asking you for that, we need to be prepared for it. And Scott's done a wonderful job at doing that, making sure that those people with participants in the workshop are protected. So, yeah, just wanted to follow in on that, Zeke, with you.
Well, both of you, thank you so much for the workshop. It was incredibly impactful. And Mary, when you talked about being in search and rescue, I was a search and rescue operator with Pierce County Sheriffs for 9 years, and this is what we do. This is search and rescue, and I think our motto speaks to that very well. These things we do so that others may live.
Yes.
I think that really rips at the heart of what of what we try to do. So thank you guys very much. I got to go inside and make sure little ones are paired up with their actual parents. So I'm going into listen only mode. So I love you all, and I'll talk to you guys tomorrow night. I'll probably be doing it from the church again. So love
Thanks
you
for
guys.
what you do, Todd.
Call me.
Good to see you,
Thank
buddy.
Todd.
Call me later if you get a minute.
All right, bro. I
All right.
will.
Zeke and Mary, I want to be sensitive to your time. We're at an hour. Do you have time for a couple more questions, or should we wrap it up with
Sure.
your
We
song?
definitely have time.
We're
Yes,
good.
ma'am.
We have time, yes.
Okay. I'm loving this, you guys. This is awesome. Clayton.
Yeah, I just wanted to bounce something off of what Chris said and what Zeke was talking about. And Zeke, I mean, you know this from our, MMPIs and you know what I mean?
I do, brother.
And then once you get in the team room or behind the fence, or up north, like I was, you figure out we're all the same dude. And there's not a lot of kids that grew up in a stable, loving, Christian, wealthy household in our line of work. And I was gonna say, Chris, like, is that similar in the police force? Do you have a lot of Boy Scouts or Mormon families or things like that have this solid family structure? Because I know, Zeke, with us, man, we all grew up the same. Like, everybody wants to know what they're looking for in an operator, and that's one, someone that can be a chameleon, and two, someone that can shut their emotions off. And you only learn that two ways, and that's either at the farm or by growing up like we did. So
true.
Yeah, it seems to be a very common thing. And frankly, I think that makes some of the best cops. Like, I used to run around the streets. I was never a gangbanger, but ran with them. And that made me a better cop by virtue of, I know the difference between real bangers and kids that are banging for survival, because otherwise they'd be victims. And it hasn't been many, but a handful of kids I've been able to either get back into school or help them get jobs and take them away. But it's through a very rough time, right? They're in front of their buddies. You throw them on the hood of the car, slam them into the car, put cuffs on them, and take them away, because they can't talk in front of the homies, right? Because that'll get them caught up. So you have to do it in very different ways. But I think that having to handle that kind of adversity and tough conditions growing up, as tragic and traumatic as that is, puts you in the best position to handle this kind of adversity. That being said, it's all undealt with most of the time. So, and back to the question just a little bit, if anybody has any theory on this, how could we try to legislate or introduce this stuff into the beginnings or in service, other than, it's a tough nut to crack, because people aren't generally vulnerable, like I said earlier, until post-service.
Yeah. Well, I have a friend, Lieutenant General Tony Hale. He was a lieutenant when I was a young sergeant, and he's big at what the Army calls TRADOC, Training and Doctrine Command, and that's who runs all of our training schools, standardization along those lines. And I said something to him about this. He saw a podcast I was on, and I said, sir, we need to be teaching this stuff in basic training. I mean, we've added so much classroom stuff since I came into 1997. That was just post kind of the first public MST type stuff. And that's when we started getting the sexual harassment training. And then we started getting other standardized training. And I'm like, why don't you teach people, for one, how to recognize when they're having an issue, where to go, and these methods that we know help, breathing techniques, yoga, mindfulness exercises, go sit on a hill and watch the butterflies kind of. And I'm not being facetious. That's literally what I do to survive. So, but I think it needs to be up front, like Sarah said. How do we get these people set up for success so that they can be more resilient and have these tools?
Hey, Clay, so that's awesome. And we could spend another hour talking about this, but I'm going to hit on two things here real quick. And Mary's probably going to want to follow up unless I cover it all by some miracle. So two things here. Number one, we're one of the few organizations I've seen out there that actually recognizes the value of getting in front of this, like you're talking about, even getting in front of traumatic events as they happen and begin to manifest in our minds and go through the science of what happens in our minds. And there are things we can do on the front end. And some of that we learned in that class. And I wish I had known that when I was with my team in Afghanistan or Iraq after something major happened. There were some simple things I could have done and led them through that we could have done together as a team that would have helped those things go where they were supposed to go without turning into what they've turned into for so many. But then on the second part of this, to go right back to Chris's question, we're starting to make inroads with this. And one example of that is we're working with the Arkansas National Guard with a program that will be coming up pretty quick, I hope, to where we go in on the front end. And the people that they are actually bringing in, we work with them to assess, evaluate, and resolve pre-service trauma before they even come in, to give them a foundation and tools to deal with that going in. Because, you're right, special operators, law enforcement, firefighter, all of us that run straight at the problem, the best of us, the best in the profession, usually have one foot on either side of the line. They're usually walking on a ragged edge many times. And what I will say to that is, now that we have the tools and the ability to resolve and work through stuff and keep our feet grounded where they need to be, we have got to implement that. But there's one final thought I want to leave you with in regard to this particular question, is that I firmly believe that by far and above the best people that are positioned to help someone through the valley of trauma is someone who has made it through themselves. And why is that? That is because they are relevant. They have the scars and they are relevant. That's not discounting anybody in the process, but there's so much power in that. So as we begin to sort this out within our own communities, and more of us lean into it that have had these experiences and made it through it, it's just that much more relevance that we can bring them in. And then everybody at play that's in here working on this plays a crucial role. But we have to understand what connects to the warrior's mind, to how they connect and how they develop trust and how they lean into things when they normally wouldn't in another venue. Creating that safe space and that trust and that relevance to follow someone through and go, hey, look, yeah, I've been through a lot of what you're talking about, but let me show you there's something on the other side and let me help you find that. It's a very powerful thing. So there's so much to work with here as we open this up. It just really gets me fired up. And I can only imagine my partner is ready to follow up on that one.
Well, thank you, Zeke. No, I mean, you've said most of it. It's just that to go back to the question is, how do we do it? I've been at this for 12 years, and Zeke and I together forming Angel Wing has been doing it for 8 years, and we are looking to change it, in legislation, but where it starts is at a community level, at a grassroots level. So it really starts like you bring it into your community, and it's successful there, and then it grows. And that's how we've gained airspeed. We took it in at a grassroots level, and now it's forming into being the success that it is. So that's all, Zeke. I'll pass it back.
Good, Clay. And Clay, there you go. It has to be ground up. It has to be a ground up movement, man. It has to be VSO, however you want to look at it. It has to be a ground up movement that influences and doesn't necessarily look to hit the wall with the mechanisms already in place, but that looks to build trust, relevance, and introduce, the things that will broaden this capability out. But it has to go ground up. We have to start it from our departments and our frontline people and come up with it.
I think I'm going to send you that email here soon. We need to hook up. I'll talk to you about the SOCOM Care Coalition and what they're doing for the active duty groups and things. So I
Sounds
think
good.
you guys would fit right in. Clay Hatmacher's another acquaintance of mine. He's the president, retired 160th commander and Echo Squadron commander and stuff.
We need to wake up some relationships with them. We did a little work with SOCOM Care Coalition a couple years, several years ago. So yeah, definitely, man. And that's what, and Mary's right, so right in that. So the power of collaboration when the right people are in it for the right reasons, is literally the force multiplier of every bit of this. And so we're all about partnering with and moving forward with people. And it has to be the right people for the right reasons. You guys know that if it's not, it gets ugly, but that's okay. We sort that out and we lean in together and we work this thing together. And man, that's where we gain a lot of ground where ground has not been gained and we desperately need to gain right now. So yeah, by far.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Clayton. Jim next. And I'll tell you, Zeke and Mary, I want to learn more. I'm really interested in learning from you guys. I just want you to know that, because you're speaking our language here. So thank you. You're just further ahead. Jim.
Well, I had one thing that I was going to say that started way back, but then Chris started talking and I wrote down a couple more things. So, I mean, just to the concepts of getting things in on the ground level with new people. And Chris, this is something that I'm working with some fire departments where I no longer go and talk to them about what a great job the fire department is and all that kind of stuff when they're in their recruit training. Yeah, I give them a little bit of that, but I talk about what I went through, the stuff that nobody wants to talk about, right? I talk about the trauma, I talk about the cancer, I talk about all these kinds of things and some of the stuff why some of that occurred and really encourage them to get help now, right? And to take advantage of the programs that are now in place in their departments and some of that kind of stuff. So we're really trying to get that in on the ground level with those brand new people while they're still in the academy, before they ever really hit the streets. We've also started doing leadership stuff with them as well, talking to them about some concepts and some fundamentals about leadership so that rather than waiting until we want them to be a leader, like, hey, let's talk to them now. Again, ground, on the basic ground level so that they come up through that process. And then the third component of that is life coaching, not clinical type stuff, but helping them unpack and deal with day-to-day things that are weighing them down to create some space so that when they do have some sort of a traumatic event, they have some capacity to kind of work through it or deal with it. So those are some of the things that I'm involved with trying to do with newer, younger people that are coming in the profession. Where I wanted to originally talk about was when Zeke, you were talking about the wounded warriors and not, having some of these programs, and I saw Sarah get all animated, but my comment or question, as much as we've talked about it and we try to talk about the stigma and all that kind of stuff, do you think that some of the reason it doesn't exist in some of those things is because we're still pushing the agenda of suck it up, don't talk about it type of a thing, and so they're just not going there?
Sure it does, man. I mean, and that's a great point because that's such an ingrained part of our culture. And let's face it, the work that we do, whether it's first responders responding to every day on their job, responding to someone's worst day, and the stuff they see, the stuff they absorb in the midst of that, or whether it is our soldiers finding themselves in incredibly hard positions in other parts of the world. This all fits the mold of who we are and what we do, but there is an element of mental toughness and resilience. But when you look at the history of how, I mean, hell, you can go back all the way to John Wayne movies. I mean, this country we've always portrayed strength as being, I don't talk about it and I got this. And we portrayed asking for help as weakness. To a certain extent, that stigma has always been in place. And yes, everywhere we go, we work to break that stigma and actually normalize the process because the science does that. The science sheds light on that and people realize, wait a minute, yeah, that really wasn't the case. But that's been such a prevalent part of our culture all the way through. And so it is a constant challenge, and it's always going to be a challenge, I think, to break that. But the truth is, you said it well. We carry that stuff and it doesn't go away. It's never going away. That never worked. That was a fake back then. The World War II veterans, they dealt with it in the bottom of a bottle. They dealt with it with alcoholism and with alcohol. And it manifested in very violent and dysfunctional ways for them. And same thing with Vietnam. Other drugs came along to help that. We're always looking for ways to alleviate that that are self-destructive. And so what that takes us on is a path of self-destruction. Now, I'm going to say this, and I think everybody here will probably relate to this. As law enforcement, as soldiers, we all become a little desensitized. It's just kind of like a natural reaction to thing, right? That's why as cops, and I know, Chris, you're going to know what I'm talking about. We have a very sick sense of humor about things from what other people think about it. We'll laugh about things and we'll make jokes about things that other people are looking at us like, man, are you crazy? And I'm the same way. So there's a certain element of that. But what you got to understand is that is also potentially a springboard for what is a path of destruction. Because if you descend down through that and you're not handling these things in a positive way, what you become is a little bit delusional. In other words, you start to buy into it. Well, this is my new normal. I'm just jacked up and I'm just going to have to be this way for the rest of my life. I will manage through this and I'll just deal with it. So there that comes into play. And if you stay in that one long enough, you become disconnected. And when we get to that disconnected phase where we actually get kind of emotionally numb, and this is something we teach in the suicide prevention course. You learn to recognize this descent in the people around you and the indicators that come up out of it. This is where if we don't interrupt that path of destruction, people get into very, very dangerous territory, right? And so, yeah, it starts with some of our natural reaction to things. But then if we're not careful and we're not healthy about the way that we handle these things and process these things and resolve these things and look at pre-service trauma and start to reframe this, then we can easily skid into a descent that takes us all the way down. It spirals after a certain point. Does that make sense?
It does. And let me bring this up too, guys. A part of that stigma is fear of change. We're really reluctant to change, because what made us great responders and what made us great soldiers was that trauma that we brought in with us, right? That made us more street savvy, that made us more relatable, that made us like and so now when you come to those old timers and you say, hey, I can give you a better quality of life, I can put some of that stuff at rest, we can find healthier ways for you to do this, they're going to be immediately afraid of change, because you're getting ready to take what they think is their strength. It's like cutting the hair of what is it, Samson? Is that his name? Yeah. So that's what we feel like, right? We feel like if you resolve our traumas and you put our demons at rest, what is our power? Where do we go from there? So what we do is we do a lot of trauma-informed education around the sciences so that they know that we can put these demons to rest, but it's not going to take our power, right? We still are going to be, if we want to be, but we have control over it. So if we want to be that crass ass and that hard nose, we can be that. And then in the moments when we need to soften, we can soften. Instead of it having control of us, we have control of that. So that's the fear of change is a big deal but we do that almost every day.
Really good point. Yeah, no, it's a really good point.
Thank you so much. So we do want to play Zeke's song at the end, which is so powerful, storytelling with music. Love it. Do you have time for one last question or?
Sure.
Okay. Mariel, good to have you on, LinkedIn friend.
Hi, Sarah. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Good to have you.
Yeah, thank you. So I have some notes that I taken about the podcast today. The first one, the event, is very important, that never disappear for the PTSD. But we need to show them how to live with that situation. So when I do some therapy for that person, we can say that disappear because they don't have cure, but you can show them how to live with that situation. That is when we try to person with some laws and laws agrees that I have a certification with that. You need to show them how to live with that situation. So that is important. Or there is the people around that the person with the PTSD, sometimes we forget about their family and the person who live with them. Is that person don't understand the different situation of them, they can never have a very good rehabilitation because they don't have this support. So that is so important. The other is about the stigma that the other person say, a stigma or the discrimination that the person have about them is the lack of information. So the government, the armed forces, everybody need to do a very impact propaganda and everything to show the people what is about PTSD. Some person, I in the military system, I have 25 years of service and counting. I continue in the army. But some persons say, and our team, that we are in the armed forces. So when we leave the system, we have a mental issue, everybody. So when we go to mobilization, deployment, something like that. So we need to show the people to they understand that it's not everybody that was in the system have a mental issue. And if they have some mental issue, how we can help them to have a better life. So that is very important. And the last note is that we need talking about, like I said before, about like that type of conversation. When you talk about PTSD, is the same that we talk with the person has some suicide situation. They speak up. We need to try that they speak about that. I do my thesis from my psychology about the factors that affect the armed forces to commit suicide, and that is I don't finish my thesis. I'm working with that, and let me know. Have a different situation, and some of the situation is about the PTSD, the lack of knowledge. They feel that like some empty, like something happened with them. Because it's easy when we enter to the military system, everybody are with us, everybody cheer up. But when we finish, or we are in the middle of our career, now we have 25 years, we see we don't have our family around us, we are alone. We have some person that have like me, I have some friends have brother-in-laws that I die. For example, I have like 4 that die in the helicopter crash when I was in an aviation, and the other I mission that some die. So sometimes we forgot the other soldier, their family, and the surroundings. So that is very important. But I want to say, Sarah, so thank you so much, because that kind of podcast is very unfortunately that not everybody see it. It's very important that the person need to have knowledge on everything about our veteran, our first responder. Uh, we need, I don't know, like do a group to spread the word. What is PTSD? It's not only for soldiers, it's for responder and different person that have a trauma. So thank you.
Thank
So
you.
true. Yes.
Yeah,
And
Mary,
go ahead, Mary.
Mary, is it Mariel?
Mhm.
Am I saying that
Yes,
right?
yes.
Yes.
No, it's Mary. It's okay.
So
Yeah.
you've brought up some beautiful points, and one of them is like family. So what we do is we work with the individual that's struggling, the veteran or first responder. Once we get them to a better place, we circle back and work with the family. Because that's going to be, that's a big part of that post-traumatic growth. They're going to have to do that together, right? And then the other part that you were talking about, and if I'm missing something, because I want to make sure I address each of your concerns, is that when you can reach out to us without being with a counselor or having a mental health diagnosis. If we do the same assessments that the industry does, and the same scoring, so you're going to be able to get help even if you don't have a therapist or you don't have a mental diagnosis, because what we'll do is we'll work off of those assessments will tell us. And if you just want to work through like some emotional dysregulation that you have or some agitation that you have, we'll go on that journey together and we're going to find the best resources for you. If we can't get you where we need you to be. And then I want to address the disorder versus the injury part of post-traumatic stress for you guys. When you have two separate industries here, you actually have the pseudoscience side of the house, which is where you're getting the disorder, because in order for them to treat you, you have to have a diagnosis. You have to be diagnosed for treatment. It's part of that license structure. So it works like, you visit, you get a diagnosis, and that diagnosis kicks out a code that kicks out so many visits, what type of standard of care that you're going to get. And then and of course the finances come into the play with that. Now on the injury side of that, you're talking that's where your diagnosis is coming from. It has to be a disorder, right, in order to be diagnosed and be treated in that license structure. Now, when you look at the integrative mental wellness and the integrative side of the house, you don't need that diagnosis to get help, right? And then you're also looking at that side of the house is only looking at research. They're only looking at the sciences around trauma, right? Because they don't need to have that structure to be supported. So that's where the injury is coming in, because the research and the science is telling us that it's not a disorder, that it is actually an injury to the brain. And if any of you guys have ever gone through our neuroscience part of our training, we actually show you where that happens and how the brain is actually injured when it goes uninterrupted. So like, it's not just about the one time. That those intrusive thoughts, those nightmares, that continual agitation, that is continuously damaging the brain over time. So two different things when we try to say, well, it's not a disorder. It's not a debate. You're looking at two different industries addressing trauma two different ways. And that's where I hope I've kind of cleared that up for you. And that was the three that I had heard. So Zeke, did you catch anything different or would you like to respond?
No, I think you covered it well.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you, Mariel, for that. That was really good.
Yes.
We appreciate that.
Thank you. And Zeke and Mary, I'm so moved by how well thought out your program is and how you have really just it's so clear that you've really wanted to nail the way to do this the most effectively, the most effective way to heal, to be able to share stories and to connect through those stories. I know for me, I really want to learn more about it. I will definitely be in touch. You are definitely part of our family, Mary and Zeke, here on The Power of Our Story. And I just want to ask you, what do you want us to walk away with today before we put on your song, God's Grace, Zeke?
Oh, wow. Thank you. Well, about the song is a true story. I wrote that song looking back over 23 years of service, excuse me, and trying to wrestle with, I was wrestling with a lot of things in that moment, but then starting to see that there's a bigger picture in play as I started to work through these things. And so the song's it's a true story for me. But as far as what I would hope people would walk away with tonight is just, and the awareness and that we're not in this alone. And I know you guys know that because you're so good in this room at connecting like that, but then the need to reach out and bridge that gap within our brothers and sisters out there who are struggling with the same thing. And the fact that from the ground up, we're the most effective ones to do it. That the tools are in play, the science backs the reality now that we can move through this, that it doesn't have to be an anchor, that we can move forward from it. And then just that we have a solid, like beautiful community built around this. And so we just need to grow that. And that would just be my input from where we are. And thank you, Sarah, for having us. Mary, do you want to add anything?
No, just thank you guys for being here and diving in, and same, Sarah, thank you for having us.
Oh,
We look forward to working in the future too.
Yes, I definitely want to. Well, guys, hang on. Let's listen to Zeke's beautiful song. I play it all the time. I've sent it to my son who is serving up in Washington. I cannot get enough of it. I love it. Here it goes.
Cool. Thank you, Sarah.
It's in the chat too. I am so sorry you didn't hear the music. I just love the whole thing. I'm so sorry it didn't go through. It's awesome, you guys. Well, you heard it. You heard most of it. Zeke, you're just a wonderful, soulful musician. I love it. Mary and Zeke, you are, I just can't say enough. I really appreciate you coming and all the work that you're doing. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having us. And thanks to every one of you all. Your questions, interaction were great. And thank you so much to even just for what you do and the way we stick together. It's good stuff.
Thank you.